The antennas weren't installed during the day. Somebody would have noticed the electrician's van in the street. I don't see how they could have been put in at night either, though. I can clearly hear when squirrels chase each other on my roof. There's no way I wouldn't notice someone walking around up there. Mrs. Jackson, a woman who lives in the house right next to mine, noticed them first. She had already called the power department, our internet and cable providers, and the homeowners association, none of which had a clue as to what they were. She insisted that I step outside and look at them, despite my face clearly expressing zero interest. Her voice was steadily growing more shrill with every word, so I eventually allowed her to drag me outside to avoid waking my 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Bleary-eyed, still in my bathrobe and pajamas, I followed Mrs. Jackson to the street to get a proper view of the thing. The antennas had 3 metal prongs, a bit like a pitchfork, pure black unlike the typical silvery metallic ones. I spent several minutes nodding seriously as she rambled on, wondering how long I was expected to stand there before I could politely resume my apathy. "You could probably climb up there from your balcony," she pointed as she told me. "All you have to do is jump up and grab." "Wouldn't it be just as easy from your balcony?" I retorted, gesturing to hers. Mrs. Jackson gave me a critical look as though trying to decide whether to be offended or not. It was only a subtle change from her usual expression, though I could tell she was becoming irritated. "My husband won't be home until tonight," she said, as though that was my fault somehow. "It'll only take a minute." It was just cold enough outside for politeness to suddenly become optional to me. "Oh, wait. I remember what that thing is," I said, turning back. I drawled out my words so I could make it all the way to my house before I finished. "That's just the government's secret surveillance program. Don't blow anything up and you should be fine." I swiftly shut the door before she could reply, and congratulated myself on a successful escape. I let my wife answer the door next time, and heard her apologizing over and over again on my behalf. I couldn't help but grin while she did so. My wife managed to get me out of climbing up onto the roof, but somehow we had lost Emma to Mrs. Jackson's daughter's sleepover during the negotiation. I didn't think anything more of the antennas until I left for work, and they caught my eye. They really did look quite odd to me, and upon looking closer I noticed there were 2 dead squirrels on my rooftop right next to it, lying in a small pool of blood which dribbled into my gutter. When I got home that night, I found Mr. Jackson kneeling on his roof beside the antenna. He was motionless and intent upon it, staring at it with such ferocity that I expected him to lunge and snap it off at any moment. "Hiding from the missus?" I called up to him. "Nice spot." He started to move his head towards me but stopped about halfway, his eyes never leaving the antenna for a second. Slowly, his head returned to its previously fixed position. I thought he might not have heard me, and I was about to try again when he said quite softly, "Can you hear it? The static." "Hear what?" "Hey, look, you mind taking a look at my antenna too? I think I saw 4 dead squirrels up on my roof." There were 4 now when I glanced up at my antenna. I shuddered, trying not to look at them. There must be a hawk or something that lived up there. Mr. Jackson slowly turned his head towards me again, his eyes finally breaking away from the antenna at the last moment. His mouth seemed to be moving, but I couldn't hear anything. I stepped closer until I could hear a faint buzzing sound. He was blowing air through his lips like Emma did when she was trying to make a fart noise. The vibrating of his lips sounded more like static, though. We locked eyes for about 10 seconds, him softly blubbering the whole time. Without another word, I turned and went inside my house, glad to be rid of him. I didn't feel comfortable about Emma sleeping there that night, but I couldn't think of a good reason not to let her go either. I packed her school bag with her dolls, a board game, and a whistle. just in case. I told her all she needed to do was blow the whistle if anything was wrong, and I would hear it and come get her right away. After 10 minutes of continuous whistle blowing, including once when she tried to make it sound different by putting the end into her nose, I had changed my mind and was kind of happy when Mrs. Jackson picked her up. Ever figure out what the antennas are for? I asked her. She gave me the stink eye. Government surveillance, no doubt. Oh, that's nice. You hear that, Emma? You gotta be good or the government will come and take you away. Sounds good, Emma said. What a horrible thing to say to your child. Mrs. Jackson sniffed. Oh? How do you get your daughter to behave? I chimed back. Shirley doesn't need to be threatened. She knows good girls go to heaven and bad girls go to hell, and that's all there is to it. Mrs. Jackson huffed without the slightest sense of irony. We were interrupted by a loud shriek of a whistle. I want to go, Emma demanded. What are we still doing here? I felt slightly sick watching Mrs. Jackson take Emma by the hand and walk away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt nervous. I watched them all the way until they got to their house and went inside. Mr. Jackson was still on the roof, but he turned away from the antenna to watch them go inside as well. It was hard to tell from here, but it seemed like his lips were still moving. I closed the door and took a deep breath. My wife and I had the house to ourselves though, and that was enough reason to celebrate. It was freezing outside, but I left the window open that night so I could hear the whistle in case Emma needed me. My wife thought I was being overly paranoid, but apparently paranoia is cute when it comes to our daughter, so she let me keep it open. That should have made me feel better, but honestly, it didn't. In fact, I felt even worse because every moment that I didn't hear the whistle made me wonder whether something bad had already happened to her. I had bothered my wife enough already though and decided to keep my fears to myself. I lay awake listening for the static sound, for the whistle, for something on the roof, for anything. But the night was dark and still, and little by little I allowed myself to lower my defenses and drift off to sleep. That night I dreamt of falling from a dizzying height, as though I was dropped from space. I kept going faster and faster, the wind whipping around me. But no matter how fast I went or how far I fell, I never seemed to get any closer to the ground. I could still hear the wind rushing by me when I woke up the next morning. It sounded a lot like a whistle. The next thing I remember, I was in my kitchen with 3 police officers standing around the table. They believed that Mr. Jackson had killed his wife during the night. The hushed tones and ashen faces of the police told me not to ask exactly how. Most of their daughter, Shirley, was found in the living room beside her mother, although they seemed to be having trouble finding the rest. Mr. Jackson was nowhere to be found. I thanked God that Emma had escaped in time. The police found her hiding on the roof, clinging to the antenna all night long to keep her from sliding off. She must be suffering from shock and cold, they said, because when they found her, she barely responded to them. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the antenna, or reply with anything besides a soft static noise that she made with her mouth.